So hello and welcome to Ewe Sew You. My name's Zoe and this is my channel all about the crafty bits and pieces I get up to. I knit, I sew, I spin on a spindle, I dabble in weaving from time to time, and anything else that takes a crafty fancy. But today we're taking a look at knitting toe-up socks 2 at a time, so grab a brew, put your feet up and let's get started. So let's talk socks. I almost exclusively wear hand knit socks, mostly because I have quite a few of them and I enjoy knitting them. And my preferred method of knitting socks is 2 at a time, toe up. But having taken part in sock madness for a few times now, I've knit plenty of top down socks, toe up socks. I've even knit one pair that starts from the heel. Which method you choose really is a matter of personal preference, although you won't find many heel first patterns. Now I like to knit toe up 2 at a time for a few reasons. First of all, you can't cast on too tightly when you're casting on at the toe. A too tight cast on at the cuff is a problem that requires frogging and restarting. Secondly, I find toe-up socks easier to try on as I go and I get a better fit that way. Thirdly, by knitting toe-up I can maximise my yarn usage. If I want to, I can keep knitting until I run out of yarn, which is great for smaller skeins, for scrap sock projects or longer socks. And finally, by knitting both socks at the same time, when you're done, you're done. No second sock syndrome. There are, of course, times when knitting 2 at a time is not the best option. Colourwork socks, I'm looking at you. In these instances, I opt to work my socks concurrently, working both socks at the same time on 2 separate sets of needles. That way I can work on the same section of the pattern on each sock before moving on to the next one, so again eliminating second sock syndrome. How do you actually go about knitting 2 at a time toe-up socks? Now the first step in any project can be the hardest. Selecting the yarn. I'm going to focus on the foot today and give you a basic recipe that you can adjust the more socks you make. I would recommend starting with a 2.5mm needle, but you can always adjust that down to a 2.25 if you're a loose knitter. And I would recommend finding a good, strong, sturdy sock yarn. Something with a nylon or a polyamide works great. Merino will give you soft socks, and Blueface Leicester is quite hard wearing. So pick your yarn and let's get going. Once you've successfully picked your yarn, separate it into 2 evenly sized cakes or balls. Next we need to work out how many stitches we're going to need to fit our feet. Measure your feet at the widest point. This is often just behind the toes, around the ball of the foot. It's best to do this barefoot. The internet does not need to see my toes. Your stitch count will vary depending on your gauge, so this is something that you'll finesse the more socks that you knit. But to give you an idea, if your foot measures about 10 to 11 inches like mine does, you're looking at about 72 stitches. Smaller feet, so 9 to 10 inches, be about 64 stitches. 8 to 9 inches, 56. You can adjust that as you get more used to knitting socks. So if your gauge is looser than mine, you're going to want fewer stitches. If your gauge is tighter, you're going to want more. If you've got an in-between size, you might want to adjust them as well. Just aim for a stitch count that's divisible by 4. I like using Judy's Magic Cast On for toe-up socks. The Turkish Cast On is also popular, but I prefer Judy's Magic Cast On. So to work that cast on, first thing you need to do is work out how much yarn you're going to need for the cast on. I'm using 2.5mm needles here. You may find that you prefer 2.75s, you may prefer 2.25s for your socks. Kind of depends on how loose or tight a knitter you are. So I calculate my yarn length by wrapping the yarn around the needles, both needle tips, 6 times. And then adding on a bit so that I've got a tail to weave in. The next thing I do with my needle tips in my right hand and the yarn in my left, I'll put the tail between the needles so that the working yarn goes over the top of that top needle. Then I hold the yarn in my left hand as a slingshot, so the tail is going over my index finger and the working yarn is going over my thumb. I then take the bottom needle, scoop up the yarn from my finger, take the top needle, scoop up the yarn from my thumb. I do that until I've got 6 stitches on each needle. Now at this point, if you want to, you can cast on the second sock to this point and then work the 2 together from the beginning, but I find it easier to do the first couple of rows of the toe and then put them both on the same needle. So that's what I'm going to show you today. So we need to rotate our needles round so that the top needle becomes the bottom needle. We're going to bring the yarn up from behind the new top needle, and we're going to use the bottom needle to knit all the way across these first 6 stitches. You will want to keep an eye on that tail to make sure the first stitch stays taut, but a nice little tug once you're done will solve any issues. That first stitch is definitely the trickiest. So we're knitting 6 stitches off this first needle. Then we rotate our needles around again. I'm just going to pop these top stitches onto the needle tip just by pulling it back there. Pull out the bottom needle and work the next 6 stitches. So that's the first round of your sock done. The next round is going to be an increase round. You can use whichever increase you like. I'm going to be using knit front and back. You can equally do the make one left, make one right, where you lift up the bar between the stitches. That works quite nicely. So just for simplicity's sake, we're going to knit front and back. So I'm going to knit the first stitch. I'm going to pull that tail a little bit to make sure everything is nice and neat and tidy. You can also address any sort of gaps when you weave that in. So knit the first stitch, then make one. So I'm going to knit front and back. We're then going to knit most of the way across this needle. If you were doing the make one left, make one right, you'd knit to 1 stitch left, but I'm doing knit front and back, so I'm going to do that on the second stitch before the end of the needle. And knit the last stitch. I'm going to repeat that on the other half of the stitches. So that's your first 2 rounds of your sock done. So I'm going to get the second sock to the same point, and then I'm going to show you how I get them both onto the same needle. So now we've got 2 beginnings of socks. So we've got 2 rounds of each toes. We're going to take sock 1, and we're going to make sure we're using the working yarn and not the tail. I'm just going to knit all the way across the first needle as normal. So we're ready for a knit round. We've just done an increase round. And then before we turn around, we're going to pick up our second sock. We're going to drop the working yarn for the first sock and pick up the working yarn for the second sock using the needle from the first sock. Okay, so first needle, second sock, second yarn. We're going to knit all the way across the first needle of the second sock. Then we're going to pull the needle that's attached to the second sock, and only the second sock, through so we're onto its second tip. And working with the needle that we started the first sock on and the working yarn from the second sock, we're going to work across the next needle. We can now discard or put away the needle we were using for the second sock. We need to get the second half of our first sock stitches onto the needle tip. Just slide them on there. Again, using the same needle, but making sure that we switch to the yarn that's coming from the other sock. So using the same right hand needle and the yarn for the second sock, well, the first sock, dropping the yarn for the second sock, work across the remaining toe stitches. So that'll be 8 in this case. And we're now ready to carry on with an increase round. So to work the toes, we're going to be alternating increase rounds like we did the second round and plain knit stitch rounds the whole way up the toe until we've got the number of stitches that we need for our foot. You can, if you want to, slow down the rate of increase further through the toe by adding in an extra knit round. That's going to change the shape of the toe and slow down the rate of increase, so it'll make the toe a little bit longer. The simplest way is to just do alternate increase round, non-increase round, up until we've got our worked out, calculated foot count of stitches. Knit the foot until it reaches the crease where your ankle starts. That's about 2 inches from the end of your heel. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do when you're working heels on your socks is you're going to work all the way across the first needle on each sock. So that's the top of the foot. So you want to obviously get that out the way, ready for working the heel, which we'll do entirely on the second needle of the sock. You may find the more socks that you make that you want to put a few extra stitches in before the heel, like a little gusset type thing, which you would just increase over a few rows just before the point where you start the heels. But as with everything sort of sock related, the more you do, the more you're going to be able to tweak the basic recipe. So I'm just going to work my way across these socks so that I'm ready to turn for the heel. Okay, so now we are ready to work the heel. For this basic sock recipe, we're going to be working German short rows. It's a nice simple heel to do. You can work it either in garter stitch or stocking stitch. I'm going to be doing garter stitch today. And the first thing that you're going to do is knit all the way to the end of the heel stitches on this first sock. So I've got to the end of the heel stitches, just going to turn around and you're going to do one sock at a time. So I'm going to slip this stitch over and pull the yarn up taut and over to the back, ready to knit to the next stitch. That gives us this funky looking double stitch. It's marked as DS in most patterns, and then we're going to knit all the way back again. Okay, so again we turn and we create the double stitch again. So again we've got that two bars going over the needle, the yarn's at the back. And again we're going to knit all the way across, but this time we're going to stop having worked the stitch before the original double stitch. so this is the last stitch we're going to work this time around. So we've got our double stitch still there. We're going to turn, create a double stitch, wrangle our yarn, it's trying to run away, and again knit back to the double stitch from the previous row. And again we turn, we make the double stitch, and we work back till we reach the previous row's double stitch. And we keep going in the same way until we have 10 to 12 stitches left being worked between the double stitches. And that's the first half of the heel. So I'm going to get to that point, and then I'll show you how we do the second half of the heel. Okay, so now we've got half our heel done. Just worked across this side to the final stitch. We're going to turn round. We're going to work the double stitch as before, so just pull that yarn up over, ready to knit. We're going to knit all the way to our double stitch from the row before. At this time, when we get to our double stitch, we're going to knit it as one stitch. So we've incorporated that double stitch into our normal knitting. We're going to do the same to the next double stitch. And we're going to turn our work. We're going to create a double stitch. It's looking a little bit scrappy and messy, but that's okay. We're going to work all the way across to our next double stitch. We're going to work that double stitch as if it was one. So you're going underneath both the bars that are over the needle and treating them as if they were just a single bar. And then the same with the next double stitch. Turn the work and go back the other way. So double stitch. So as I say, it will look a little bit like a tripod at this end, but that's all right. It's going to get incorporated on the next pass anyway. So we knit over, and we work 2 double stitches as if they were single stitches again. It's the same on every row until you've worked all of your heel. So just turn the work, create a double stitch, knit to the double stitch from the previous row, and work 2 double stitches. Okay, so keep doing that and I'll show you the heel when it's finished. Okay, so I'm ready to work the last row of this heel. So I'm not going to worry about doing a double stitch now. We're just going to knit all the way across like normal the whole way to the end of the row. So there'll be 2 double stitches at the far end when we get there, but by the time we finish we'll have an entire row of just knit stitches, and that'll be the first heel complete. It's a nice simple heel. It's a good one to get you going if you're not sure what other heel to do. And once you've knit a few pairs of socks, you may want to try out some other heels. You may find you keep coming back to this one. I like this one because I don't have to think about it too much. Heel flap and gusset can require a bit more thought just to get the placement right, particularly when you're working toe up. Whereas the short row heel is the same the whole time. Every time you do it, it's always the same. Okay, so let's work those 2 final double stitches. And there we have our heel. So it's nicely shaped, it's the same on both sides. And we're going to repeat exactly the same thing on the other sock. Okay, so we now have both heels complete. We can see them here. Now I've done these as shorties, and for some people this will be fine for a pair of shorty socks. Other people are going to want 1/2 inch to 1 inch of more height over the top of their heel here. So I mean, try them on and see where they're sitting. When you're judging how long your leg wants to be, you need to leave enough space at the top for your cuff. This is 10 rows of ribbing to give you a sense of how much space to leave. That's about 1/2 inch. Some people prefer a 15-inch cuff, so 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch, and it's entirely up to you. So just try the socks on once you've got the heels done and decide how long they want them to be. That's the beauty of toe-up socks. You can decide as you go these sorts of measurements. And when you get to the top and you've done your ribbing, I've done a 1x1 rib, which works really well for a cuff. You want something stretchy for your bind off. So I like the tubular bind off, and if you're unfamiliar with how to work that particular ribbing, then check out the video that's on screen now where I show you how I do that.